My dear brother Silas, today began like any other day. The sun rose over the fields, lighting my sweet family's way to wakefulness. I prepared breakfast, tidied the house, took up my sewing, and gathered the children for our ride into town. My Sarah runs around like a little savage and does not want to wear any of the lovely dresses I make for her. I counted the blessings the good Lord bestowed on me and tried to remain calm while getting them ready.
See you. Okay, now go.
But all of this I accomplished with much impatience and an eye toward the clock. For a most out-of-the-ordinary event was to take place at 10 o'clock at the Wesleyan Methodist Chapel. It was a convention for the discussion of the rights of women. My dear friend and neighbor Ann Dewey showed me the notice in the newspaper. Oh, now I can see you raise your eyebrow and give me your stern look. And I beg you not to disapprove of me. But a public meeting for women is such a curiosity. And my beloved husband, Mr. Griswold, did not forbid it. So I made up my mind to go. I am only slightly anxious about letting Mr. Griswold take care of our children and our home for the next 2 days. Your loving sister, Lucy.
Eight years earlier, Lucretia Mott, a Quaker leader who had already earned a reputation for speaking out for the rights of slaves and women, traveled to London as a delegate to the World Anti-Slavery Convention. At the convention, Mott met Elizabeth Cady Stanton, a newlywed who was there on her honeymoon with her husband Henry, also a delegate. Mott and the other women delegates caused an uproar on the convention floor. The entire first day, the men debated, not about the evils of slavery, but whether women should be permitted to participate. Finally, it was decided that they could remain silent in the gallery. The humiliation of this experience forged a lifelong bond between Mott and Stanton. They vowed to expand the crusade for women's rights after their return to America.
My dearest sister Lucy, you will be pleased to hear of my new position. I now have full responsibility for managing the mill. However, my increased duties have not kept me from doing my work against slavery. I was a little confused by your letter. What did you mean by women's rights? I have just returned from a church meeting where we were given more accounts about the terrible conditions of the slaves. They have no freedom or rights. Don't women already have rights? Men must work very hard to provide their wives with a home and security and to support their children. What more could women desire? Your friend Anne was always strong-minded, even when we were children. I'm surprised her husband still tolerates her. He must be a saint or too old and feeble to control her. Have I not told you that what men most prize in a woman is her affection? My Martha understands this, and it is truly the success of our marital bliss. I urge you to follow her ways. Your brother, Silas.
In the summer of 1848, Lucretia Mott and Elizabeth Cady Stanton joined Mary Ann McClintock, Martha Wright, and Jane Hunt for afternoon tea in Waterloo, New York. Stanton, no longer infatuated with being a homemaker, recalled her feelings on that day. I poured out the torrent of my long accumulating discontent with such vehemence and indignation that I stirred myself, as well as the rest of the party, to do and dare anything. They decided to call the first Women's Rights Convention.
What a very good idea. We need some kind of a document that will set forth exactly how we feel about these things. And you're really...
One week later, they met at the home of Mary Ann McClintock to discuss a plan for presenting their grievances.
We hold these truths to be self-evident.
They chose as their model the document which had brought charges against the King of England, the Declaration of Independence. The women called their document the Declaration of Sentiments, and it would indict an entire society.
Therefore, it is with great pleasure that I introduce to you my dear friend, Elizabeth Cady Stanton. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men and women are created equal, that they are endowed that all men and women are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. The history of mankind is a history of repeated injuries and usurpations on the part of man toward woman, having in direct object the establishment of an absolute tyranny over her. To prove this, let facts be submitted to a candid world. He has never permitted her to exercise her inalienable right to the elective franchise.
This is election day, and my brother is 21 years old. How proud he seemed as he dressed up in his best Sunday clothes and drove off in the big wagon with Father and the hired men to vote. I turned to Mary and I said, "Wouldn't you like to vote as well as Oliver? Don't you and I love the country just as well as he, and doesn't the country need our ballots?" Then she looked scared, but answered, "Of course we do, and of course we ought, but don't you go ahead and say so, for then we would be called strong-minded."
He has taken from her all right in property, even to the wages she earns. He has made her morally.
I have earned enough to school me a while, and have I not a right to do so? Or must I go home like a dutiful girl, place the money in Father's hands, and then there goes all my hard earnings?
In the covenant of marriage, she is compelled to promise obedience to her husband, he becoming to all intents and purposes her master. The law giving him power to deprive her.
As the Lord Christ is the head of the church and the head of the man, so is the man the head and governor of the woman. This is God's choice and should not be transgressed.
He has denied her the facilities for obtaining a thorough education, all colleges being closed against her. He allows her in church as well as state, but a subordinate position.
Our colleges were never intended for the education of females. The male brain weighs more than the female brain. This proves that women are intellectually inferior and should be educated for different purposes.
He has usurped the prerogative of Jehovah himself, claiming it as his right to assign for her a sphere of action, when that belongs to her conscience and to her God.
I felt that I had found my vocation. I forgot God and did not know it, forgot philosophy and did not care to remember it. But alas, I forgot to get Bard's dinner. Not only once did I do this, but again and again. The fire went out or the bread ran over in the pans, while I painted and dreamed. Had the passion seized me before marriage, no other love could have come between me and art. But I felt that it was too late, as my life was already devoted to another object: housekeeping.
He has endeavored, in every way that he could, to destroy her confidence in her own powers, to lessen her self-respect, and to make her willing to lead a dependent and abject life.
Dear Silas, you sound more like Father than Father did when he was alive. I must confess, I am confused by all this talk of women's rights. My heart is inflamed as much with a fearful anxiety as it is stirred with new ideas. I never expected to see women speaking so eloquently and with such power in public. Yes, dear Silas, they spoke like men, or even better. Yet, I know I'm very happy in my own home with my wonderful children and loving husband. But what about my lovely Sarah? Should she stay home like I did while her brothers go off to college? Shouldn't a man want a woman who can think and is well educated to be his companion and raise his children? Your loving sister, Lucy. P.S. No need to fear, Silas. I have not signed any declaration. I could not be sure how Mr. Griswold would feel, so I held back. Oh, and by the way, Anne didn't sign either.
300 people attended the Convention for Women's Rights in Seneca Falls. Of these, 68 women and 32 men signed the Declaration of Sentiments, including the African-American abolitionist Frederick Douglass. This gathering demonstrated to those women unhappy with their status that they were not alone, and it proclaimed to the world that here were women and men willing to change the conditions and injustices which oppressed them. They knew their path would not be easy.
My dear Lucy, I urge you not to look away from your own little family circle for the means of producing moral and social reforms. You can be a guiding light within your home and should not participate in public demonstrations.
Amy, come back here.
Amy, you don't want to keep playing with us. Go back with your mother on the blanket, okay?
I pray you still believe that women are far superior to men morally. That is why it is your duty to instill your children with those values our dear departed mother taught us. Your loving brother, Silas.
What do the ladies want? They have the best place and choicest titbit at the table. They have the best seat in the cars, carriages, and sleighs. And at the present time, with the prevailing fashion, one lady occupies 3 times as much space in the world as a gentleman. If there is any inequality or oppression in the case, the gentlemen are the sufferers.
Little did the critics and newspapermen realize that the negative attention they gave to the first Women's Rights Convention served to spread the flames of discontent to others. The issues, now hotly debated in the public arena, could no longer be ignored.
This meeting, as I understand it, was called to discuss women's rights. Well, I do not pretend to know exactly what women's rights are, but I do know that I have grown for 40 years, yea, for 50 years, under a sense of woman's wrongs.
In the eyes of the law made by men, women were classified with minors, lunatics, and idiots. They could not own property, make contracts, sue, or serve on juries. A woman was only one husband away from poverty.
Dear Silas, I write with a sad heart the news of Uncle Edward's death. Unbeknownst to Aunt Grace, he had deeply encumbered himself in debt, and the creditors have claimed everything. Now she must leave the very house which her father gave to her. It frightens me to think that a woman who loses her husband may become destitute in an instant. What if something were to happen to Mr. Griswold? And who would take care of us? Oh, I shouldn't permit myself to think such thoughts. I must confide in you that I will do everything in my power to secure a good education for Sarah, so she can be independent and realize her own self-worth. We have stopped buying sugar produced by slaves. It is my small way of helping the cause. Love, Lucy.
Dearest Lucy, I will miss Uncle Edward. He was always so much fun to be with, although he helped himself too much to the bottle. Surely Aunt Grace was aware of his drinking and financial extravagances. Perhaps Aunt Grace will remarry and thereby ensure the security of her family. Husbands are the best protection from poverty, even though they are not immortal. My boys are shooting up like cornstalks. I urge them to study hard so they can earn a living and support me when I'm too old to earn any more. My work keeps me so occupied that I worry that I do not spend enough time with them, although I do not know how much time they want to spend with me. Martha is still frail from the birth of Joshua. She looks forward to spending some time with you, your loving brother, Silas.
The common experience of childbirth and child rearing bound most women together. They spent much of their adult lives pregnant, giving birth, nursing, recovering from births, and supporting their female kin and friends.
By God's grace, I have given birth to 10 children before my 34th year. And though 4 of them have not survived, I am still alive. With God's grace again, I will give life to this one, and he will not take mine. I pray that Jonathan will not take an interest in me again. I cannot bear much more.
Dear Silas, today is Sarah's 16th birthday. Where, my dear brother, do the years go? Sarah is very involved with herself. Oh, I know this stage will pass, but sometimes, she is impossible to be with. I took her to town to buy material for a silk dress. Her ideas about fashion differed from mine.
How about this one here? Oh, I'm so sorry, Mrs. Hoskin. She does this.
We passed a woman wearing bloomers. I must say they are not very flattering to the hips. I told Sarah that I would relish the freedom of movement they give. Sarah declared that if I wore such a scandalous outfit, I wouldn't be welcome to visit her at school or tell anyone I was her mother.
My dear sister, mark my words, if women insist on wearing those vulgar fashions, the next thing you know, we will see them smoking tobacco. It is fortunate that your Sarah has not inherited her mother's radical notions. She will need to attract a level-headed young man for her husband, and no healthy member of the masculine sex would ever be attracted to a woman in bloomers. On a more serious note, I am daily more concerned about the great rift that grows between the North and South. I know that Eli is worried over whether he will be able to keep the factory running. There's so much talk of war that I fear for all our sons and our country. Your loving brother, Silas.
I'm worried about. He can laugh.
When the Civil War came, women kept the farms producing and the factories running. They donned nurses' caps and marched to the battlefields to heal the wounded. They taught the children and kept the home fires burning. The leaders of the women's movement led the campaign for the passage of a constitutional amendment which would free the slaves. Women expected equal rights for the slaves and themselves after the war.
My dearest Martha, the sadness wells up in me as I write to you about the great loss we share with the death of my dear brother Silas. I hear very little from Eli and my sons. I have been comforted with Sarah's presence as she awaits the return of her husband. While we don't always hold the same opinions, we manage to have lengthy discussions to fill our lonely hours. Once the slaves are free, I believe the Negroes must have the vote to protect themselves from any more abuses. Sarah says that women must also get the right to vote. She feels if women would have a say in the laws of the land, then there would be no wars. Maybe she's right. I still feel that even if we have a say, who would listen to our voices? Martha, am I just growing old and tired? I wish we could be together now. With loving comfort, Lucy.
When the war ended, most abolitionists supported a constitutional amendment giving African American men the right to vote. They refused, however, to include a woman's right to vote, fearing it would be too controversial and would defeat their cause. This decision created a major split between those woman suffrage advocates willing to put their desires on the back burner and those unwilling to wait any longer for the basic civil rights of all women. The seed planted 20 years earlier in Seneca Falls still had not blossomed.
My dearest Sarah, at 40, I know you feel you are too old to take advice from your dear old mother. But at my age, I feel I have earned the right to speak my mind about your daughter and my granddaughter. I sense that you and Charles are afraid that Hannah will be criticized and ridiculed if she enters the medical profession. I hope you will accept this money as my modest investment in Hannah's future. If your father were alive, he would have wanted this too. We must make sure our daughters have the same opportunities as our sons. I'm afraid I won't be around much longer to see all the changes that are yet to come. And yet, I can't help but think about how far we've come since that remarkable day in 1848, and how much of the road is still left to travel. Your loving mother.